episode of Blam Blam Truckers. This
That's
is
Blam
part two.
Blam Truckers.
This is part two of our MMO tank tactics
Part 2.
discussion. So, take us away, Beas.
All right, so last time we talked about charging and pulling. Those of you, that's the first choice you have is when you're going to deal with a group of bad guys, of mobs, your first choice is, do I charge in as the tank or do I pull back? Pretty obvious, one of two choices. Now, when you're pulling back, are you pulling back to group, which we talked about, or are you just pulling back to pull only a few of them? Only take a couple of mobs with you, which is another thing you could do. That's your two main choices for pulling back. You also might have a trap laid out. Like if you're not a tank and you're playing solo, right now they just made changes to devices for blasters, giving them not only their trip bomb, but they turned the time bomb into a remote bomb. So as a devices blaster, and I think this is something that would appeal to Beas a great deal, because this is something that is right up his alley. I've seen him play solo before. This actually reminds me of the way you used to play a shaman in EverQuest, which, as anyone who knows EverQuest, is going to be like, what was he thinking? It's not a rib. You're about to hear it. You're going to know what I'm talking about. What you can now do because of the way they've changed remote bomb, or they've changed it into remote bomb, is you already have operative, which makes you invisible and gives you mana and health regen, or endurance and health regen in this game. You can actually go up to the group and put the remote bomb on one of the group of mobs. Then you can set up a time bomb. Time bombs last 3 to 4 minutes. I forget how long. I'm sorry, trip bomb. A trip mine. So the trip mines last 3 to 4 minutes. I forget which one it is, but they take 30 seconds to recast. So you can set up 3 or 4 of these things if you're patient. So you set up 3 or 4 in a row, and then you put a remote bomb on the mobs themselves, run back a ways, and hit them with a long-ranged attack, or set off the remote bomb by pressing the button again. That it does damage to the entire group when you set off the remote bomb, or do both. If you've got a ranged AoE, which you probably do as a blaster, you hit them with the ranged AoE. You hit them with the remote bomb. They come charging at you. They have to go over the trip mines. They hit one, boom, kills off some of them. Hit the next one, boom, takes out a whole bunch more until they get to you, and no one actually gets to you. And if they do, you've got caltrops, or Caltrops, caltrops. That's how I've always pronounced it, but I've heard it other ways. You've got those laying down there for them to not only take damage, but be slowed ridiculously for you to now unleash whatever damage you want to from your blaster power set onto them. That's pulling into a trap. As far as charging goes, it's not just what the tank does, though the tank does tend to control the group in a lot of ways. They decide on the pace of the attacks, how many things they're going to pull. Another thing you can do when you've got a tank that's as tanky as my stone tanker is, Kelly the stone tanker, look me up on Reunion. Send a tell. I actually have other people pull mobs onto me. Now what happens is, I'm going to bring up my metal mouse pad here. I recommend metal mouse pads, not this particular brand, but just metal mouse pads in general. They're awesome. So what you're going to do in this case is you're just going to stand here in the middle as the tank. And then somebody else is going to go over here and pull the mobs over here and then run past you. So the mobs actually have to path through you, through the tank, to get to the guy they actually want to get to. But if I'm standing here with 2 damage auras running and doing AoE and whatnot, as they run past me, they're going to get hit by those 2 damage auras, and now they're going to aggro on me. So I actually have people, and this happens to me in farms more than in regular gameplay, who are going out and pulling other mobs on top of me. That's not a classic, maneuver that you'd see in EverQuest or WoW, but in City of Heroes, where you can build ridiculously powerful superheroes, you'll see it happen. It's a viable tactic. Yeah. There's an ability in City of Heroes called Fold Space. It's one of the power pools under teleportation. Fold Space. And what it does is it takes mobs that are in the area and pulls up to, I think, 12 of them or 16 or whatever next to your character. So anyone who goes deep enough into 3 powers, it's the third power you need to get in teleportation, who goes 3 powers deep into teleportation can now get full space, not just tanks, but if you're a controller, you might want to think about this because now you can take disparate mobs that are all over the place, put them in one place, and hit them with your control power. Hit them with a blaster can now hit them with their AoE. A corruptor can now hit them with your AoE. Maybe you're a defender or a corruptor or a controller or dominator, but they don't have this ability, who has nature radiation, which has an AoE aura that's a hold aura. Doesn't do any damage, just holds all the mobs that it touches, assuming it beats the check. Everything's got to beat the check. So assuming that it's accurate enough, it will hold all the mobs it hits. So if you do fold space, and all the mobs appear nearby you in a tight group, and boom, you hit them with the hold aura. Now you have a whole bunch of mobs who can't do anything, while your pets or your friends take them down, or you with your AoE damage. Something to think about. Um, yeah, I can't think of any more tactics off the top of my head. I did pulling. It's really about coordinated attacks, and it's not necessarily going to make your game more fun or less fun, but it'll make things go faster, especially when you're trying to complete a task force and you're running out of time. Thinking about planning through what you're going to do, how you're going to deal with a problem, different abilities, talk it out, type it out nowadays, but if you're all in the same Discord server, talk it out, figure out how you're going to work through this and make something actually succeed. Again, I'm not talking about individual bosses for like task forces and what you have to do for that, but generally, if you're ranged, stay out of melee range and hit them from a distance. And all of these tactics are going to lead into weird builds and no, excuse me one second. I didn't want to hiccup on air. I know, I could have. I would have gotten I would have had to say excuse me and all that stuff. Uh, so let me see what the next top. Whoa, where's my mouse? I move the mouse pad, I move the mouse. Standard character builds. Okay, the first thing I want to say about builds, and do you have anything you want to add? Any tactics you've used over the years?
For tanking, well,
Oh,
so
there's
we've been
one more we do need to talk about. Go on.
in regards to tanking. I haven't done as much tanking in City of Heroes. I did in WoW, I did in EverQuest, and in both cases as a paladin. Uh,
A lot easier in WoW, isn't it?
some yeah, sometimes yeah, but I do have to say, one of my greatest threat generating abilities in EverQuest, once once we got it, group heals. Man, I can generally hold stuff on me pretty well or pull off of other people, even if it's just
Mm-hmm.
temporarily, just by spamming group heals constantly. Because paladins in later EQ became very, very capable healers, uh, very capable group healers. But it's not realistically EverQuest as it went on. It went from everybody kind of had a more of a specialty in their types of heals, to except for paladins, which were just cleric, very, very, very light, um, more just cleric light. But eventually, each class really came into its kind of own, and paladins became really great group and raid healers, and that was something I was able to use. I've never been a fantastic MMO player. Good, competent, never been fantastic. But yeah, it's something I was able to do and had fun doing.
All right. So I want to do my Gowron impression for you all real quick. So anyway, oh, the Empire, oh, son of Moog. Um, there's one more tactic we need to talk about, and that's called Feign Death. It's named Feign Death from EverQuest. Most other games will just use the term Feign Death. Hunters get that ability in WoW. There is no Feign Death ability in City of Heroes, but the basic tactic is the same. This is a variation on pulling. What will happen is the puller will go out, get the mob's attention, and bring them back to the group. And then they're running back to the group. Here, let me use my little Mandalorian guy here. So he runs out, gets the mob's attention, turns around, and runs back to the group. And then he feigns death. Bop! I'm dead! And the bad guys, not having him there, just kind of stand around. And if you're not in range of them, they'll just walk back to where their spawn point. But and if that's the case, then what happens is the warrior or the tank will now fire a ranged attack at them, and he'll grab one or two or three or all of them if he wants them. Sometimes you feign death, you come back and you feign death far enough away from the group that the group now has to choose which ones it wants. Or you can run right up to them and feign death on top of them, and the warrior just has to get everybody's attention, or the controller has to put everything on pause as the warrior is getting everyone's attention. Feigning death is a great tactic, and it can be exploited to really, really hurt other people. One of the things that monks used to do in EverQuest, and still do in EverQuest, is they would go out and grab a bunch of mobs and get like, go over here, get a group, 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 hi, and just get them all mad out of them, run to where they want to be, run past a group of people they don't like, a group of players they don't like, and once they get on the other side of the players, and the mobs are chasing them and about to hit the monk, that's when the monk feigns death. Now the mobs have lost aggro. On the monk, they have no aggro, but they have area aggro, proximity aggro is what we call it, proximity aggro on the players, and they will now turn around and attack the other group, the group that the monk didn't want there, or
That
just
is
wanted
what we
some
call
vengeance on.
training.
Oh yeah, that's grief play right there.
Mm-hmm.
Just playing to give somebody else some grief.
Yeah.
It's not nice. Don't do it, folks. Now
No.
that you know how to do it, don't do it.
Although I think the new EverQuest servers, they don't make it possible anymore to do that.
Uh, they have locking now, which isn't always what they do, but it was in the last one. Mobs lock onto you so that
Until they
uh,
get back to their original
nobody can
spot, they
steal.
won't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nobody can steal the aggro away from you. So yeah, um, but yeah, that tactic needs to be talked about because it impacts. Feigning can impact your build, and let's see, we're at 13 minutes. Do we want to do a new video on the builds, or do we just want to continue into builds?
Um, we can just continue into it.
Okay. So, standard builds in City of Heroes. And remember, if you're having fun, you're doing it right. So, there's 8 arc, 8, 10, 12, 12. Hold on a second. I got the game up here. There are tank, melee, ranged, crowd control, support, pets. So in the tank class, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 people, 4 things that can tank under melee damage, not including that one. 1, 2, 3, 4 more classes. That's 8 classes so far. Range damage brings in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 additional four additional classes. So you're looking at 12, 13, yeah, 12 or 13, maybe 14 different classes. We're going to cover the basics on what those builds look like, what standard builds look like, what people always do. Let me bring my windows back up here. All right. So power pools for a standard tank build, what a standard tank build looks like. There's so many variations, I can't tell you exactly what it looks like, but your goal as a tanker is to hold aggro And you do that by by being able to take damage, being able to put out a lot of damage. A little bit of damage, a lot. What I mean by that, but that's the phrase I always like to use, is a little bit. As it's not a lot of damage. It's a little bit. It's a lot of little damage, or a little bit of damage, a lot. It's a lot of little damage. So as a tanker, and this is true for brutes as well, both of them get there's two different abilities here. There's punch voke, and poke voke. Tankers get punch voke, where every mob that they hit with a single target attack not only uh, hits it with the same amount of aggro as your taunt, but it also does an AoE taunt to everything around it, just in melee range. So every single target attack does that. Every area effect attack also has an aggro component to it when you're playing a tanker. Now, that's punch voke. Poke voke for a brute still has an aggro attack component every time it hits something, but it does not have the area effect to it. So that's why we differentiate between punch voke, which is super for tanking, and poke voke, which also leads to why you want to do a little bit of damage often, a lot of little bits of damage, because every time you hit, you're going to the top of the aggro list. So if you can increase your hits per minute, you're staying at the top of the aggro list. Your goal isn't, as a tanker, isn't to do damage necessarily. That's not part of the role. Your goal is to hold aggro and be able to survive it. You are a survivability based class. Now that we're getting into design philosophy here, which is going to lead to standard builds. Now what you're doing there is you want to make yourself as tough as possible, as tough as you need to be, not necessarily as tough as possible. If everybody wanted to be as tough as possible, we'd all be granite stone tanks or invulnerability tanks. Those are the two best tanks for survivability. That's just the way it is. Somebody might make an argument for super reflexes, but super reflexes doesn't have the resistance to just tank the kind of damage that a stone tanker or an invulnerability tanker can do. Now, if you get to that point where you're utterly indestructible brick of tankiness, you're not going to be doing a lot of damage. So you need to pick the kinds of damage you want to do. So damage auras in particular are very useful. Having 2 damage auras, which is the most you can have, is also very useful. You might want to spec into the power pool speed and go all the way down to whirlpool so you're getting in another hit. That hit for that aura of whirlpool, which repels, so you slot it with knockback to knockdown. And I know I'm getting into technical talk here, but I don't have time to explain it too much. If you get whirlpool or most knockbacks, slot them with sudden acceleration to knockback to knock down. So instead of the mobs going flying, they just fall on the ground. Then they stand up, get hit by it again, and fall on the ground. It keeps them held without actually using a hold spell or attack or ability. But you want to hit them as much as possible. One of the nice things about auras is because of the mechanics of the way the game works, uh, slows in City of Heroes, now this is not true for other MMOs, it's true for City of Heroes, slows increase the recharge time for your activation, so your recharge time, to stop you from reactivating the power. Let me say that again. A slow in City of Heroes increases your recharge time. It extends the recharge time. So it takes you longer to activate your power again. That's how negative recharge works. That's how slows work in this game. They increase your recharge time. The thing about toggles, about these damage auras that I'm talking about, is once you turn them on, they stay on until you run out of endurance. So as long as you are regenerating more endurance than you're spending, your auras don't shut off. If they never deactivate, do they ever need to reactivate? Beas, what do you think?
Kind of lost me for a second there.
Okay. I'm sorry. If I lost you, I've lost the rest of the audience. Let me try this again. As a tank, you're trying to get in as many hits as possible. You're not
I
worried
got
about
that.
damage. Right. Okay. You're not worried about damage because your punch folk or your gauntlet skill will taunt anyone you actually land a hit on. The night you probably want an aura, at least one, maybe two. You don't have to do this, okay? How you build your build is your business. But if your goal is to just out out taunt everyone else, then you want a couple of damage auras. 1 to 2. Maybe 3 if you go into Whirlwind. Don't worry about Whirlwind right now. By having a damage aura up, you are invulnerable. You cannot be affected by slows. Your attack cannot be slowed down. Now your other attacks can, but your damage aura's attack cannot be slowed down by negative recharge attacks. That's the point I was driving at. The reason why is because in this game, recharge determines your slow, or how fast you can use the ability again. So you have your activation time, which is usually a second or two, and once that recharge time is up, then your recharge timer starts again. I'm sorry, once that activation time is up, your recharge timer starts again. If you never deactivate a power, like a toggle, like a damage aura, then it never needs to be activated again. It's already activated. So it never deactivates, which means the recharge timer on it never extends. Even if it does extend, who cares? You're never using that recharge timer. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's why you want damage auras as a tank, because negative recharge doesn't affect auras. It doesn't affect toggle skills. Toggles are abilities you turn on, you toggle them on, and they stay on until you run out of endurance. It's why that. So yeah, that's my point. As a tanker, you're going to want a toggle damage aura. You don't have to take one. It's not going to make you a bad tank, but it's something to keep in mind when you're trying to hold multiple enemies. And on top of that, there's no damage limit to the number of mobs you can hit with a toggle. There are to other abilities, but there aren't to toggles. So if you want to go farming, having 2 auras up is going to make you a better farmer. That's why almost all farming tunes are radiation damage, fire, armor, brutes. Because brutes get a damage bonus that tankers don't get, and based on how many things they've hit and how many things have hit them, and there's an aura in radiation damage, and there's an aura in fire melee. I'm sorry, fire armor. There's one other what do you call it? One other attack set that has an aura, damage aura, and that's spines. Those are your only 2 that have damage auras. And then for armor, you have dark armor has a damage aura, fire armor has a damage aura, and stone armor has a damage aura. And I think radiation armor might, but I'm not certain. Off the
Oh,
top of my head, I don't know, and I don't want to bother checking. We should probably stop there because we're past the 20-minute mark, and we're trying to keep these short.
okay. All right. Well, if that's the case, we'll see you next time. Have a good one, truckers.